I studied industrial engineering and civil engineering, and when I finished both studies, I think I was I thought that one of these degrees will be wasted because construction was completely separate from the manufacturing world, and here are some of the pictures of the projects that I was part of or have been a part of, and you know, I was quite eager when I came back from Hong Kong, and you know, had all these ideas about lean manufacturing and supply chain management and so on. So, but it was sort of, I felt quite fast that on the construction site there's nothing to do with it. But quite surprisingly, in the past 4 years, when I've been part of Welement, so this is what I'm doing at the moment. And before I was more into concrete, now I'm into timber and prefabrication, offsite construction, and so it's been interesting to see that construction has quite rapidly in the past years started to ask what can it learn from manufacturing, and that's why we see offsite construction, because we're talking about productivity and so on. So it's been a really enjoyable ride to see this progress in construction, and so my talk will be what I'll try to explain to you 4 ideas. Firstly, I'll talk about the value chain, how I think about it, and how the processes in the value chain are important. Then productivity. Well, this is something that construction is talking about all the time at the moment. Then how is craftsmanship linked to productivity, and how will craftsmanship in this traditional sense survive? And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about parametric building systems, and I'll explain why I'm calling it this way. Firstly, the value chain. So the value chain, this is a very simplistic overview of the value chain, and why it's interesting to me is that, as Rode, or as the introduction said, I've been part of this many sort of different parts of this value chain, starting from the very beginning with real estate development, and then up to the end where we have construction and then handovers, but quite very simplistically, you have a demand, and the supply chain sort of satisfies this demand. And in this value chain, you have a lot of different participants. And what's the most, well, maybe the most important ones would be the developer, the architect, but also the bank, the municipality, and the politicians, up to the contractors. And my main interest, I communicate a lot with architects and the developers, and then to see how different are their motives. And although they're working in this one value chain, trying to create this product, which is a house or whatever, a building, they often have very contradictory motives. So, but the value chain has very different setups. I'll just, don't put a lot of emphasis, I'll just show you quickly. This is something that we did as a process mapping, trying to see where we fit in as Welement in the value chain. In the upper part, you have one possible scenario for it, and then where we start creating value and helping this whole process. But the value chain, just very simplistically, and I know that I'm generalizing here, but has goals. So, and I'm dividing the value chain at the moment into 2 main parts, 2 main directions. The first value chain is the return on investment value chain. I know it's very simple, but I mean, the point being that everything that happens in the value chain, the land, the design, the building, and the project management within the whole value chain, and even the emotions, part of marketing, and then the time that we have in the whole value chain, it needs to be smaller than the selling price. because it needs to generate a profit. So that equation defines the parameters, defines the whole idea in the value chain, and it defines also the design logic. So this means that the shape of the building, the materials that we're using, and every sort of decision that we're making is defined by this equation. So this is a project that we just recently did with Welement. It's an office building, 16-story office building, a hybrid structure with facade elements. And this is another project where my point being with this project is to see that the architectural details and the whole setup of the building is defined by this equation, or the return on investment logic. The other being, and just for the lack of a better term, I call it return on emotion. And this is basically all public buildings, but it can be also private villas. The idea being that the equation doesn't need to end with a profit. And you can come up with a better term for it, just let me know. But everything you do in this value chain is defined, so it has more variables. It can be more free flowing, and it needs to generate an emotion. The emotion can mean very different things. It can be inspiration, it can be national identity, it can be vanity, or this being one example of, I mean, Zaha Hadid, of course, is a cliche example already of everything that is sort of in architecture, free-flowing, and the form is very extravagant and so on. But and this being a private villa that I found the picture online, but maybe in this case the emotion would be vanity for a structure like this. But the point is that it's all the two distinctions as profit or the other one emotion. And the goal of the value chain defines the parameters of the equation. So it's important to understand, and this is always what I'm trying to sometimes explain to critics, art critics who are looking at some decisions in the city planning or what type of buildings are going to be erected. So you cannot sort of fight against this equation. Also, this goes for architects. But the main question why I'm talking about this very sort of basic idea is that which value chain actually can be made productive. And my sort of belief is that we can only make the return on investment value chain productive. We don't need to make the return on emotion more productive, because there's no point. They will be only quite unique buildings, and the time aspect of minimizing the time is not really important, and you will not gain more very sort of considerable better solutions. And this leads to productivity. So why is construction talking about productivity? Is of course, and of course industrialization, because everybody, I would imagine, now has seen this graph that shows compares the construction productivity with the manufacturing industry, and how construction has been declining in the past 30 years. But so the logic, of course, is simple. I fully get it, because I see this in our factory as well. Within a time unit, you're making, within the time frame, you're making more units, and so you can get the cost lower. I think in construction, we are, what my problem often is, and I'll come to this later in my slides as well, is that we're focusing on the last part of the construction value chain, or the real estate value chain. And only in the last part, you have actually two parts. You have time and material that define the cost. So, but my point would be that the productivity that we measure would have to be done with the whole value chain, and this defines the cost, because architects don't use any material; they just sell their time. So the time, in this sense, of course, I'm using labor. So just bear with me with a simple term, but But the time aspect is something that we don't measure. So the productivity of a value chain defines the cost, because if a detailed planning or project or business project would be instead of 2 years or 3 years, it would be 10 years. So that defines the cost and the whole logic behind it. So it's the productivity in this sense, I think, needs to be redefined how we measure it. So time and material. So it's very important. Just keep this in mind. But the problem, I think, what I see at the moment with the sort of what we're looking for with productivity in construction is that how to raise the productivity of a multi-component product. And the building is a multi-component product, just like a car is a multi-component product. It's just, you know, you have leather within a car, you have leather, you have cables, you have technology, you have steel, you have, so you understand that building is very similar to this. It's not just the supported walls, and it's not just timber, because this is also what we see in our industry. We are seeing that, you know, where does the timber come from? Is it sourced locally and so on? But the timber is just not, okay, it's a considerable part, but it's just one part of the whole equation of the building. So how is construction at the moment, at least, let's say the avant-garde sort of talk, how would you solve it? And so one idea would be, let's bring robots on the construction site. And I think this idea is wrong. Because first of all, with printing, you can solve only one part of it. And I didn't even know that the supportive walls were the biggest problem. So think back to this whole value chain that I showed in the previous slides, and think about what is actually solved, what part is actually solved with this. And I used to, as I mentioned before, I used to be in concrete, and I remember one of my first jobs was with precast panels. We used like a pump to make the joints with precast panels, which are pre-crafted in a factory and brought on site. And I remember it was a really big problem getting the pump working, because in the heat it gets clogged, and in winter you have also different problems. So whoever has worked with concrete knows the problems, and also if you bring it on site, you are prone to these weather conditions. So and not to mention the CO2 aspects of using cement. But whenever you see these printed buildings, you're actually just don't think about the walls. Think of all the other details that are added there that are not actually printed on site. So just to emphasize again, if you look at it from a car angle, so this is not a car, and on the right, this is not a building. This is just the the structure of the building. And there are so many other different parts dealing with supply chain management that compose this final product. And also with house printing, why I'm criticizing this is that although, yes, I know that machines don't need rest, I get the point, but machines need maintenance. We see this in our factory all the time. So the rest is just another word of maintenance, and so how this value is created is questionable. The other idea, of course, would be to bring modular components in an automated factory and then bring them on the site. And this is what we are doing. And this also, what I would like to say is that these are other factories as well that I took from the internet. Automation in construction is already happening, and we see this a lot, or increasingly in the timber industry. You know, you have this KUKA robots that are minimizing the labor part, but the idea is that in a factory setting with really high precision, it's very easy to control these robots, but you know, when we started Welement, we saw how difficult it is actually to start ultra precise machinery and set it up in the beginning. So the setup feature is something that you need to take into account in the maintenance feature. So automation is happening in construction quite increasingly, but it's not happening on the construction site because it doesn't make any sense, because you think of the supply chain network. What is it changing and what is it solving? And this brings you to craftsmanship. The fear of craftsmanship and the technology that is ruining craftsmanship, you know, this has been since the Industrial Revolution. And picture here, the Luddites. Some people, if we destroy the machines, we will stop them from becoming used in the industry. But of course, this fear has never manifested itself. At the moment, I understand we're talking about AI, we're talking about maybe generative design, we're talking, do we need architects and so on. So I think these fears are quite interesting, but history has shown that this, it doesn't manifest in this way how we think, but it will just change the craft. And more specifically of craftsmanship, I'll tell you a story, a personal story about what I think about craftsmanship. So I used to own a summer cottage, an old farmhouse. This is me and my friends working. So it was an old house, and we used to do repair. We did some repair jobs. I don't own it anymore, but this is actually the guy who's with the sunglasses is a designer. So this is how we usually work also at in construction. It's we do the heavy work, but this is actually a joke. But anyways, the works that I did there personally was, since I studied civil engineering and I was a project manager, it was interesting to me to understand, can I actually do these works? So it was, I built a furnace for the smoke sauna, and then did some tiling work. So built like a shower corner with some, so if you can see here, the tiles are specifically selected to be very different so that you don't see the poor quality of work, and also some roof tiling. And the other work that we did was build a prefabricated outhouse. We didn't unfortunately have time to put the cladding on the factory, but we did some, if you can see in the roof, this intricate details with the CNC machinery. And it was quite easy to set it up. And why I'm telling you this story is because when I did the bricklaying and the tiling work, I understood it was, first of all, physically really demanding. And the second issue was that I understood that for me to achieve a level of efficiency, to be really good at it, it would take me probably 5, maybe 10 years. I'm just personally, that's my problem. But when I think about this prefabrication part, what we did, it was quite easy. And if just, again, think about like value is added with for what is on site, what we control, the precision, the quality, and the value, then how it manifests it on site when you bring the elements on site. So my idea with this would be that to become a skilled mason or skilled tiler, I would say, it would take really a long time to achieve a level where I would be also paid accordingly. I would be enjoying the work. But with timber and prefabrication, the value was, so to do this in a factory setting, it makes so much more sense because it's a more enjoyable environment, it's lit and so on. So I'm not saying that all of this works would be automated, but what I'm just saying that when we're talking about craftsmanship and the future of craftsmanship, young people moving into the construction sphere, it's very problematic to understand that how this craftsmanship is going to survive because it's quite difficult. So the idea of this cost of craftsmanship is very important. And just to going back to the car industry, where this one of the interesting things that I found was that Rolls-Royce is doing this new direction called coach build, where it's building with clients, completely doing a new design for a house, for a car. And so I think for the first car, it was like a 4-year process. And here you see craftsmanship being presented as part of the product. You know, it's important to understand this handcrafted parts of the car, and the final product, of course, unofficially, as I understand, costs 20 million euros. Why it's important is that I think high skill level and sort of like a great craftsman needs to be paid accordingly. And these words like handmade, quality, authentic, and tailor-made architecture and something in this direction is something that we think about with traditional craftsmanship. But this would be a picture of a line with the Mercedes S-Class, which is also a luxury car. But of course, when we're talking about this unique Rolls-Royce, 99% of the people cannot afford this. But there's also, like, if we look at this S-Class production, is this not craftsmanship, or is this just assembly work? And I don't think it this way, because this is just craftsmanship that is changing. It's changing, and we're seeing this also in our factory floor, is that it's not just automation, and it's not just handcrafted work, but this technology changes the craftsmanship. In the future, I would say that this craftsmanship or this modern craftsmanship would be something that works together with machinery, and you still, of course, have this traditional craftsmanship, but this needs to be paid accordingly. So a couple of pictures from our factory as well. Again, what we see when you go in the factory floor, you see the use of automation. You see how the workers are working together they're kind of like shepherds for the machinery, because the robots are just as dumb as the commands that you give them, and you need to check them. And coming back, this is a building that I think was just 2 weeks ago. I got it from the site, so don't look at the construction site. It's maybe not that clean, but the idea would be that this was a team of builders that were general contractors. They knew the new construction, but they had never done timber prefabrication before. And this is just one day of work, and the elements are done without our factory. Just think about this, like how easy it was, and the tools that you use just to create this unit of value. And it's just 3 days the box was up. You can do it this way, of course. There's nothing wrong with it, but when I think about the future and young people working, then I think this, in the long term, working in the cold and rain, I think it might become problematic to keep the young people who are going in the construction direction stay in this field if the work will remain this way. So traditional craftsmanship and modern craftsmanship, I think this is something that, just bear in mind that it's different, and this traditional craftsmanship will survive in this return on emotion value chain, but the modern craftsmanship will be part of this return on investment value chain. And then parametric building systems is why I'm calling it this way, is another thing that I'm not a big fan of is parametric design. Why I'm not a fan of this is I think architects have occupied this term, and the focus is always sort of, if you think about the concept, the focus is on a form that is very unique, this link with CNC machinery, CAM/CAD commands, and so on. So it's sort of like finally, as I understand, the problem was this on the left, and now we have a solution. And this is not to say that I'm not a fan of very unique architecture, sci-fi look of a building, and then this is what I'm not what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is this term parametric design is very limited, because the parameters in the equation, and again going back to this value chain equations, how they are set up, the parameters are numericals or measurable factors within this system. And this system is very important. The system, because this productivity can be improved only with building systems or a platform. And the value chain goal defines this equation. And these parameters, to me, when we're talking about parametric design or parametric building systems, more specifically, is this plot characteristics and the budget and the load-bearing parameter properties. And DFMA, for instance, can be part of this. Design for manufacturing and assembly can be part of this. So this equation is important, but the equation is much more than just the form of the building. And this equation, again, going back to these value chains, is this parametric design and thinking more like generative design and value chain optimization. This is most likely going to happen in the return on investment value chain. But the other one would be, this has more variables, return on emotion, you know, looking for this optimization part in this value chain, I think will become, it will be difficult. So, and then just jumping back to the car industry, this is a picture of this MQB platform that Volkswagen developed. I think their problem, so the idea would be that you're using the same platform on completely different models, even different brands that they own. And I think the interesting idea was that the 60% of the development cost was between the gas pedal and the front wheels. So you have this one thing that is not a variable, but so my idea would be that when we fix the parameters in the equation, it doesn't mean that it will be monotonous buildings or standardized buildings. That you can leave variables, but you need to analyze the whole value chain to understand that what we need to fix. And so this leads to, of course, this concept of mass customization. So what construction needs to understand is that the car industry is dealing with sort of this gradual evolution instead of constant revolution. And if you look at, you know, look at different models, how they're always systemized, they follow as logic. It's basically still the same car, but it's becoming more complicated. It has more technology, it's more safer, it's more greener, and so on. But these small details is important to understand that these systems remain focused, but the aesthetic details and the modular components change. So we get to the point. I would like to sort of emphasize again that we need to look at the whole value chain when we want to increase productivity, and also industrialization needs to be part of the whole value chain, because 70% of the cost is defined in these first steps of the value chain. And if we just focus on making the final part, the productive, so how construction is trying to do this is that they're trying to make the productive work more productive instead of sort of focusing on the waste and the sort of redoing work and so on. The value chain can have different goals, but we need to rethink how we approach them from the beginning. The building is a multi-component product, and automating one part does not make the value chain more optimized or productive. And traditional craftsmanship, I think, can survive only in this return on investment value chain, because it needs to be paid accordingly to keep people sort of fine-tuning their skills and so on. This how we think of this traditional one, but at the same time, craftsmanship is changing, and I think this is nothing to be afraid of. And productivity can be improved, but only when we systemize the whole value chain and control variability or noise, how like Daniel Kahneman puts this. Okay, so this is the end of the talk. I'll get to the questions first. You know, great. Thank you, Rhoda, for inviting me. The questions, this is something that is at the back of my mind at the moment, so hopefully these will be helpful in your workshop. So what we're trying to, at least in the past weeks, we have thought among ourselves was like, what makes up the cost of a car, and what really, if it's very easy to Google this to see like how is this value chain divided, like the raw materials, the time and labor proportion, the design, product development, and what is actually the profitability of this car industry compared to real estate construction industry. And I found it was pretty surprising that the car industry, like what actually is made from a car, it's not that big, the profitability, but how is this whole value chain functioning? What is the most profitable car model and why? And how long do these, like, how do these long framework contracts between tier one suppliers, because we're always sort of looking at just the factory part or the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer who puts the final car put together. But I think this is a very simplistic understanding of the value chain. It's a very intricate network that actually is working towards this, and in my mind, the car is much more complicated than a building. So I think I'm not saying that they are the same, but I think we can learn from them how they have, what kind of like economies of scale and efficiencies they have achieved in that industry, and then look what can we actually achieve with automation. How far can we get with the cost of construction? Sorry, the other question, what's an interest to me is this, that considering that there are these fragmented nature of the construction value chain, what would be the tendering mechanism for different value chains, and how do we measure this? So I think different value chain, as I need to have this customized goals and customized tendering processes. So, and return on investment is quite easy. I mean, it needs to generate a profit. So the drive towards minimizing the cost is very easy to understand. But what would be the design goal and the whole sort of setup goal for a prison or a hospital or a school? And like I know that this IPD contracts are good, but I think I'm really interested in this tendering process, like how the public sphere would understand how to set up how to get this in the right direction. And like, for instance, I talked to a friend who is in the startup scene, and we tried to bounce some ideas. What would be like, one solution maybe would be like, we need a school for 250 students. Needs to be green, inspirational spatial quality, take into account the future directions of learning. But then if you go to the budget, you know, the maximum budget would be 10 million, but this design score would have the highest weight. So like to make an architect or an engineer and a builder work together already from the beginning. And that doesn't mean that they need to come up with a building that's just 10 million, but they can come up with a very unique design that's actually 8 million. And so the weight ratio of the cost would be not so important, but it would mix up the cards. So just something that maybe we would have some ideas how to look differently when we think about these different value chains, also how we customize the tender mechanisms. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauri. So, well, one thing I would like to tease you with this. Well, I hope you have also seen young children. Perhaps I do not know, but for sure you have your children as well, and they all like cars, and they know how cars will act in detail. But when they start to build a house, a small house for children, then in fact they know that blocks are needed, but they do not understand how it works. And quite often these well, buildings they create, they collapse. And your presentation was quite the same. You somehow took the initial position that, well, we all should know how cars work and how it's normal to understand the structure of a car. And then boys, girls, here are the buildings. Well, they work something like this, so they are not so developed. So what has been done wrong in the history? Because in fact, for more than 5,000 years, people have built buildings, and the history of car industries is very short relatively to this. But we compare everything to cars, and cars are somehow just coming from a god.
I think it's a good, like I think cars and buildings are a good comparison, because cars are just, at the one point, it's just automobiles. It's four wheels and you need to, for moving it around. But the car has this, like I think Chris Bangle put this, the legendary BMW designer, you have this avatarness of a car. So you are a BMW guy, you are a Mercedes guy, you're a Tesla guy, and this defines your whole personality. And why I'm telling you this is, I think with a building, it's similar. I mean, architecture and design of a building also, you're a functional guy, or like a traditional building guy, or like, I think the architecture brings up so many emotions, and at the moment, I think architects are looking to find this uniqueness in form, and this is why we also see this. But I think this is not wrong. I have nothing against it, but my important point would be to understand that we are generalizing too much construction, and we should understand that Rolls-Royce has a part in, like, in the it's supposed to cost a lot and so on, and a Volkswagen is something different. And with buildings, the same is, like, what we are trying to achieve needs to be in the form and sort of like this like, when we think about these mega trends in construction at the moment. So you have, at the same time, at the one point, you have increasing demand, whether it's by urbanization or just people moving, just moving, and or the population is growing. So, but at the same time, you have this pull towards affordability. You have the lack of skilled labor. So pushing the cost down cannot happen this way, that that we don't think about the whole value chain. And I think the car industry has understood this, that also it's always changing as well. You're right that it's very new, but it's reinventing it. But construction has I think up to now, not reinvented it. It has sort of like, there has been a lot of progress in the material development, but this processes and how we think about the whole product development idea and so on hasn't been really thought about that much, I think. But of course, it's very problematic. You have different countries, different norms. So it will take a lot of time to get it better. So I mean, it's an enormous task, and it's just I have days when I just also think that, you know, this doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but in everyday life, you are one of these persons now who I would say every day meet the worker, just either a skilled worker or less skilled worker. You have to work with them. You want to explain them the whole story you have been explaining us during the last hour. Well, do they understand what you are saying? Because usually they say, well, you are the capitalist, you are the owner of a factory, and well.
Yeah, this is what architects usually say about construction people and the real estate developer. Mostly, they're the worst capitalists, right? But even if you think about the profitability of the construction industry, it's not actually that big. I mean, that's one of the main problems of this. But if you think of development, I think this is also a great misconception and a good point, that this capitalist aspect of this equation, it's something like you know, maybe my problem is that I am pro-capitalist. So, but in this very classical sense, you know, I'm not for crony capitalism. I'm not for something that this theory has evolved with. But the basic idea is good, but we need to understand that it also defines the ideas in the form. And when you think about the real estate developer, and why I mentioned this time of the value chain. So let's say that a real estate developer makes 20% profit of a building project, but you need to divide this 20% for 5 years, because this initial investment, the huge investment like land, was maybe made 5 or 10 years ago. So let's say if you have a big project and you see that the final part, the 1 year, is for the construction work. So the idea that as a developer, you're making a lot of money, but you haven't seen this money for 5 years. So you need to divide this to hold the whole period that it needs to make up. So, and also just quickly, also just like to say, this architecture is this very unique part, that unique art, that it's, you know, you can't just buy a piece of paper and make a painting. You know, architecture, to manifest itself, you need the whole value chain. But this means that, this is why I also mentioned these different parts in the value chain, is that we think that architecture is the most important part, which it is because it defines the shape of the building, and you know, everybody likes beautiful buildings that fit into the city environment. But the problem is that this is so much more complicated, because architects are part of this value chain. They don't own the value chain. They're just one part of the process. And they need to understand that, you know, this demand satisfaction with this building, it starts, you know, that there are, for this art, the art of architecture to manifest itself, you need the whole value chain, and you need to understand why it's functioning. In one case, it's to generate profit. In the other case, it can be to generate emotion. And I think this is important to understand the underlying principles, why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. And these ideas, they take me to the following stupid question, of course. Well, do you want to return to any university to learn something additionally?
I'm never not well. Never say never, I guess, but you know, I'm trying to, at the moment, I have this possibility of trying to make part of the construction supply chain better. So I think at the moment for me, it's just because you know, so we need more people, I think, in the, also in the practical part to sort of try at least piece by piece to make it better, to understand. But of course, it would be interesting to. So if your question is like, is there something else that needs to be learned to understand the future of construction, then yeah, I mean, product design would be quite interesting for me, I would say, and then product development. And this part is like, I've thought about architecture, but because this is where it goes right or wrong, it starts with design.
Okay. Okay. What about the girls? Do they want also to ask any questions? Just smiling and.
I'm smiling because, yeah, exactly. I wanted also to ask the audience if there are questions, and to invite you also to state your questions, you know, that you can raise your hand, we can give you the word. I saw at the beginning there was a hand raised, but then it disappeared. And
if I could ask a quick question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Very interesting perspectives bringing to the table. And I think it's very good with diversity of ideas and putting also this economic perspective on the table. I think it's very important, as we all need to deal with the economy today. It's very important dimension. But I try to understand this comparison to cars. And because I'm trained as an architect, urban planner, I see this individual needs of customers as society. And I really, this is my priority in my job. Even if economy is giving the framework and a very rational basis of whatever is possible, still I would say we define these needs. It's opposite, let's say, to car industry, when we have a model and we like it or not, we afford it or not. In housing or in when we design something, it's for life sometimes for people, or save lives in terms of some hazard events. So we need to define really this individual needs of a group, of a society to match. It's also following a little bit Bauhaus, following the logic of fulfilling the needs of a particular group. So what would you comment on this?
I absolutely, I mean, the sort of human aspect of it is insanely important. I mean, and again, this is something that I think I get a lot of critique from architects when I'm talking about this value change, or is that, you know, we have this really bad examples from, well, like I would say ugly examples of the period in the, you know, 60s and panel sort of this Soviet style buildings that are very, but the problem here is that I think this human aspect of it was also misunderstood or misguidedly done by the modernists when the first ideas of this, like productivity in construction and so on, like how do you do it, and then the Bauhaus movement and so I think, but the other aspect would be that I think we as people, from a building perspective, we are thinking so much that we are very unique, you know, like we see this at the moment, like people, what their types of houses and plans, what they're doing in Norway and Sweden, but ergonomically, we're basically the same, you know, we have the family structure is the same, our hands, feet, you know, we function the same way, but it's very interesting to understand, like see, like why are these sort of basic architectural concepts so different in different countries that we have seen in, but at the same time, sometimes it's just a private house and so on. So with the car, of course, it's simple. The road defines the parameters or the limitations for the car and the safety aspect of it and so on. But at the same time, the car is, you know, go into the parking lot and there's not a single car, but the changes are in details. And we're really, I think, excited about the new car design and if it comes out, but actually the system is, I think, 90% the same. It becomes maybe more complicated. But so I think, I don't want to sort of say that the car and the building are the same, but I think just fundamentally, when we sort of look at the basics, it's just we can draw some parallels there, how we look at the designs and so on, and how we, because if we are doing, like, if you, the example with this Rolls-Royce, I think what I see, at least in Estonia, is like people hiring an architect to do a private house, and you have this artisan, and it's really exciting to work with architects, and I do this basically every day. But I think, you know, unique architecture needs to, it should cost more, and I think it's a luxury, unfortunately, because everybody wants to get paid for their time and this unique perspective that the architect as an artist puts on the table. So, you know, architects also are not, you know, working for free. They're also businesses. I hope I kind of answered it.
Yes, thank you. I would say I'm not completely satisfied in a way that we still, I would say, within a framework of economy, we can create different scenarios, different possibilities, even using prefabricated models, still replying replying to the needs of the particular group of society. So I would say, for me, it's very important to behave, I would say, economically correct, but still, I would say, recognize the needs. I think this is really key for me.
I fully agree with this, but I mean, like, when we think about mass customization, and let's say those buildings that I mentioned, like in 50s, that they were mass produced, and now everything in other industries as well is being mass customized. So you have some parts that are fixed and some parts that are variable. So I think I completely agree that, you know, I don't want standardized buildings, that all buildings look the same in a city environment. So I think that would be this monotonous view of the cityscape is definitely not something that we should look into. But then again, there are still, when we're talking about the housing ideas and so on, so I think there are just these realities, and we need to find the beauty within these realities of this equation. And we are quite often doing it, of course. It's, yeah.
Thank you, Lauri and Anna. Because we actually running out of time and Günther raised his hand, I would like to give him the word, and that will be the last question to Lauri today. Although there are several questions that I'm sure the rest would like also to ask, and me myself. Günther, I'm going to give you, now you should be able to ask the question yourself.
Okay. Is it audible?
It is on.
Yeah, okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for this wonderful talk, and I like your talk for a specific reason, because for many reasons I'm totally in line with your viewpoint, and for some reasons I fully disagree. So this is the most beautiful thing for me, always to find connections and also to have reasons for good discussion. So thanks for that. So, for example, I totally agree that we are searching for profitability and productivity in wrong places. And you gave several examples for that. On the other hand, usually we blame, as we heard yesterday, Alberti or Brunelleschi for separating the disciplines and kind of like splitting design and craft into different paths. And this kind of like manifested it over the years and decades more and more until now. Still, we cannot overcome this kind of positive idea of the master builder, let's say. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's also linked to politics and so on. So my question related to that is, how can we kind of like feedback the loop with this, what we call tacit knowledge? So you gave this wonderful hands-on example. I have same experience. Whole of my life, I also was thinking with my hands, not only with my head. And when we look at the painters, the great painters in the past, so they had their masters and they would copy them. They would look at what they were doing and they were learning, and then they, if they were good enough, they were kind of developing their own ideas, their own techniques by doing it and by kind of like rethinking it, and sometimes coming up with totally different proposals or ways of doing it. So if we separate that even more, and I think that's the example of the car, I totally disagree for this reason, is if we separate that more, how can we feedback the loop if we kind of like assume that the designer in the beginning already knows everything until the last screw on the building site? So how to assemble, how to have this tectonic. So even I know many workers on the building site, they have great ideas, but they are really frustrated because they don't find ways to feedback their ideas into design loops and so on. So that's why I totally disagree with the car example. I think car is kind of discrete parts for distinct functions. It's also what, in German at least, it's the mobilia versus the immobilia. So mobile versus static. Car is horrible in terms of efficiency. If you compare the use of the car to per 24 hours per day, it's horrible in terms of material use versus sustainability, even under kind of like operation. So it's totally different in scale. Most parts of the car you can handle by hand, which is totally different to building sites, which when you handle by hand large pieces, they will simply kill you. So it's kind of like, this is where I totally disagree. So I hope you got the question somehow.
Yeah, I think because of course, first of all, you know, I'm generalizing a lot when I talk about this, and because the comparison with the car industry is always a problematic. I mean, but I would just like to not maybe at least on myself, I'm not so much focusing on the product itself, but just the processes and the value chain, like the net, like how they are thinking in terms of product development. And this also is linked to this master builder idea, because, you know, like there's a great book about this. I think it's the Refabricating Architecture, which talk like how we should like rethink architecture, because at the same, you know, you had this master builder like Leonardo or whatever, like, you know, they were masoners, they knew the material, and but the buildings were quite simple, you know, they were just, you know, you had 2-3 materials, but the building of course, I'm simplifying this, but at the moment, but you know, you had this luxury of knowing everything. But at the moment, the building is so complex, and this is the multi-component aspect of it. It's just not, you know, it's not just printed supportive walls. You have, you know, windows, window details, this vapor-proof layers. You have automation. You have cables. Everything is an intricate web of the supply chain, and this product later being used is a very complex thing. And for an architect to know this, I mean, it would need to be like a super person. But in this sense, I would then add that I would say maybe this parametric design aspect or parametric building system aspect is something that should move in this direction, that for a certain value chain, the architect, you know, because we need to make more efficient also the other parts of the value chain. So I think I would say that, yes, it would be maybe naive to see like architects, engineers, constructors work together. It would take a lot of time to make this unique building. And we don't have this time luxury if we want to make the housing units maybe more affordable. But maybe this design aspect can give specific tools that allow the architect already in that part to make the right decisions, and without doing the reworking everything. You know, although I understand the architectural process is also about finding the right answer or finding the right design, and it's also in this like process of the art aspect of it. But when we look at from the car, then we sort of, the designer and design team and the engineer team, they're constantly, you know, working on this ultra small details of this car design, but they're working together. They're trying to find the best solution together. But of course, this development phase is very expensive, and you need to divide it by several units being made or sold. So I think, yeah, the negativeness of a car, yes, I agree. But then again, we still need them, and it's, I'm just also from a realistic point is that, you know, building is also bad. I mean, the CO2 aspect, the steel, cement, it's a major contributor. I think it's 30% of the CO2 emissions in the world are generated by the building industry. So, and building everything out of timber, that's not going to be the solution. So yeah, I hope I kind of answered it.
But didn't you use your experience from the hands-on to feedback your own loop at least? And now you have like this bird's eye view on the process. So that's why you were kind of like maybe mastering it in a better way, or where you know where to kind of adjust things. And how can we do that in a general way? How to feedback this loop?
I think, you know, again, like when I thought about like, okay, this was a country house and I do the tiling, but you know, you need to understand, like, I think again about the productivity aspect of construction is that when you do these things on the site, it's not just the work that you do on site. It's about the whole supply chain. You know, the materials arrive, there's a wrong amount of materials. You cannot work. So this wasted time is very important that we don't measure in construction. So when I thought about my own experience was that, you know, there was a store actually close by. So I used to go there like 2 times a day because I was missing something. Like, it's okay, I need this tool now. Okay, maybe it was not that bad, but you know, if you put it in this was for me personally, and it was fun, and I enjoyed the process. But you think about the person who is doing it for work, and I think this wasted time in their day is very important to understand, because when we started Welement, we saw in the factory like how it's not about doing more in these 8 hours, but it's about controlling these 8 hours, that you can actually be productive in these 8 hours and not waste time, just, you know, because we see instantly. But the problem is that our time frame in the factory is in a day very easy to measure. We have all the digital systems measuring time, but with a construction value chain, when it's divided for a long period, it's very difficult to understand this waste we're just making. And I think this would be a main point where we can just already make it productive, just not waste time.
Thanks a lot. Really, it's so interesting. It's really pity that I'll have to say that we need to stop the webinar because we need to continue in the other session, and there is a collision of the program. So even if I don't stop the webinar, it will stop automatically in 2 minutes. So I'm really sorry to interrupt this very interesting discussion. And thank you one more time, Lauri, for your input. I think you really brought very interesting and important perspectives in our discussion, and we'll continue now with the discussion in the other session. So if you're interested, of course, you can join us, but we thank you very much for this public appearance.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.